we'll start with something that I think you have very close to your heart, and that's your 3-day workshop that you're coming in the spring to do here in Montreal.
Absolutely. I've done it now in Canada and every major city in Australia, Canada, U.S., Ireland, England, over 300,000 people. It's the most singly powerful thing, that kind of therapy that I know. Mm-hmm. And I now know the neuroscience of it, why it is so powerful.
Right.
And there's even a whole evolutionary understanding of why we need to get to the vibrant child in us, that our development shouldn't be minimizing childlike qualities, it should be maximizing them.
Yeah, and you put that into practice in your workshop?
Well, what I do is help people go through each developmental stage. Like, did you get your infancy needs met? Now, what would that look like? It would be issues around orality. Do you have oral, you can see eating disorders taking place. A little baby cries, and of course you do put the nipple or the breast in his mouth, but some parents, all they do when the child cries is stick ice cream in their mouth or something in their mouth. So the child is learning to eat sadness and eat anger. Mm-hmm. And when I did the PBS series in Vancouver on eating disorders, and I had Canadian therapists there work with 3 people, and we took them through the anorexia, bulimia, obesity, and through the middle stage and through the completion. I did it all in terms of feelings. Okay. And the anorexic doesn't want to eat because food equals feelings.
Okay, but this is not the only topic that...
No, not at all. What this workshop covers is, did you get your developmental dependency needs met? Yeah. And those needs are very different than an adult's needs. I mean, as an adult, I can reach out and get my need for attachment or affiliation met. A child can't do that.
How do you achieve that in the workshop?
Well, we basically, I call it original pain work. And we know that in the first 4 years, the child is dominantly in the feeling part of the brain, the non-dominant hemisphere, not the language part, because language doesn't come in till about 4 years old. And then really through the first 7 years, you're more in the non-dominant, the right brain, or if you're left-handed, it's just the opposite. But it's the non-dominant hemisphere. So the whole bonding between a mother and child is right brain to right brain. What that means is that talking is not going to be effective in healing attachment trauma or attachment disorder. And so much therapy is just talk. It's talk. You think if you tell people, it's going to work. But what the right hemisphere controls is feeling, and it regulates the reactivity of feelings. So if you don't have emotional literacy, that is, nobody taught you, named your emotions for you, helped you express your emotions and validated them for you, what happened is then you dissociated. You held your breath, tightened your muscles, and finally you didn't feel anymore. So what this workshop aims at is helping people get back to the nonverbal level. And so I have a series of exercises, like for infancy. I have people imagine that they're being born, and we play the heartbeat of the mother. I have a tape that actually has recorded the heartbeat of the mother in the womb. And I have the breathing of the mother recorded in the womb. And people don't think that they have memories of this, but they do. And so the idea is that suddenly I say, what face do you see? Because the first interpersonal relationship of our life is looking into a pair of eyes. And what an infant needs is to have those eyes mirror back. And if you have a parent who has all kinds of unfinished needs, then they can't mirror back. I mean, a child will start getting it very early on that she's not going to take care of me, I'm going to have to take care of her. Now, they don't get that logically, but they get it from a survival point of view. So we go through infancy, and that's your narcissistic needs. You know, so like guys like me and Wayne Dwyer and all of us, we 40 years we're running around getting applause from everybody, and I say, hey, we have narcissistic needs that we didn't get. And most of us have worked through it by now. But you know, teachers teach what they need to know the most.
You have been doing that workshop for how long?
Since 1979.
And what kind of feedback did you get from people? Did you ever get feedback from people
Never,
who did it?
never had one single case where somebody doing these, going back into the non-dominant had terrible repercussions. Or
okay, but what about good feedback? Good comments.
The feedback, and I have to say this unequivocally, has been the most startling thing to me, that people will say, this workshop changed my life. And I don't want to overdo that, but I have thousands of letters where people have told me. When I went to Australia, people had been doing the workshop. Canada, of course, Canada was getting all the stuff from PBS, and I actually put this workshop on PBS, the PBS series called Bradshaw and Homecoming. It was the book I had that was #1 on the New York Times, which is in 41 languages now. You know, when you think about that, it means there's something here that is tapping a nerve. So what we have had nothing but people saying, or I'll have people walk up to me and say, I've been in therapy for 7 years and more happened to me this weekend than 7 years of therapy. Now, I don't want to put therapists down. What I want is my workshop to help therapists. You know, I want a person to be able to go back to their therapist after this workshop, if that's the case, and say, you know, what I really got in touch with is that all the trouble in my attachment, my bonding happened in the twos, when I started saying, no, I won't, it's mine. Now that's a natural developmental stage because the child starts separating. It's called oppositional bonding. So I give a whole index there. Do you have trouble saying no? Do you have trouble with anger? Do you have trouble knowing what's yours? Boundaries. And then most people will have trouble with that. So we then do an exercise that helps them, like the first exercise where you see a face, the infancy, then I have the person sit in a group and people give them affirmations. Like I would be it. I would just close my eyes and I would hear you, Jean, I would hear different people, about 6 people in the group, saying things like, John, welcome to the world. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're a girl. I'm so glad you're a boy, because a lot of girls knew their dads wanted boys. You'll have all the time you need to get your needs met. I'll be here for you. You won't have to take care of me. I love you no matter what. Now, obviously, an infant can't understand those words, but if a person didn't get those needs, they will start crying. And so what I say to people is, you want to look at what the impact of your attachment issues are in your adult life. In other words, with infancy, trust is the most important thing that has to develop out of that. So here's a woman who keeps picking men who she can't trust to continually prove to herself, or her old brain keeps trying to find somebody that she can trust, but she keeps picking the exact people she can't trust. Right. And so she goes through one bad relationship, or he goes through one bad relationship after another.
Thank you. You've written a few books and produced, I know, a number of tapes and TV series. And today, when you look back at the first writings that you did, the first books that you did, is there anything you would change in it today?
The first book I did was with the TV series Bradshaw and the Family, with the mobile, showing how families are social systems. I revised that book and I softened some of the language in it because I was just finishing my work. And so you know, I'm a 40-year recovered alcoholic, recovering alcoholic. And so there's a certain sense where you are polarized when you're an addict. And even in the recovery process, I see people that are addicted to 12-step groups, or they're addicted to their therapist, or they're addicted to out-of-body traveling. In other words, they get polarized. And so what I did when I revised the family is just softened it. That, you know, for promotional purposes, they were saying 96% of families were dysfunctional. They were saying I said that. Actually, what the quote was, Virginia Satir said 96% of families are functional most of the time. 4% are chronically dysfunctional, but all families can get dysfunctional. And so I softened it, in other words, so that it wasn't as absolute as it sounded. I was almost evangelical and I think some people thought I was an evangelical preacher. So I softened it. And I've softened now. The shame book I'm getting ready to revise, that was the second book I wrote, and I've gotten a lot more information on that. Darwin felt that what distinguishes us from the animals is blushing, and the mother of blushing is shame. So what is peculiarly human is a healthy sense of shame. Now what happens is the healthy affective shame, when it becomes toxic. And how does it become toxic? By having your feelings shamed. So you have anger, you get spanked, or you have sadness, you get spanked. And instead of someone saying, I hear that you're sad, validating your feelings, which would help you develop emotional literacy, you get shamed. So your feelings get caught in a shame bind. Your needs are shame bound. If you have a thought, it gets bound in shame. And so pretty soon the feeling of shame is no longer a feeling, it's an identity. And the identity of shame is really a source of violence. It's probably the greatest source of violence in the world, because what it is that I'm flawed and defective as a human being. And so what happens is you either act less than human, so you don't, you're a criminal, you're a psychopath, or you try to be more than human. You're perfect, you're righteous. So you have shame at both ends of the scale. Even those that are running around acting the most righteous can be shame-based. So
violence is one of the subjects I wanted to touch upon with you, and so you associate today's violence with shame. I associate it.
I think all violence comes from family systems. I mean, if I was a terrorist child over there with the Taliban or with Osama bin Laden, what am I being raised with? I'm being raised with hate. I'm being raised, and I don't get any feedback that tells me anything. I don't see a good American or a good Canadian or a good anything. They just say that those Western people or those democratic people are materialistic and Satan. They're Satan. Well, of course, we do the same thing to some degree. I mean, we have our fanatical conservatives who kill abortion doctors and bomb their clinics. And so there is a sense in which the root of violence is in the family. Like my country, the USA, you go back to the beginning of my country, it's all about violence, a revolutionary war, the Civil War. And who are the heroes of the Old West? Jesse James. Who are the heroes on A&E? John Gowdy. They do whole and serial killers. We do whole biographies. We should stop even mentioning their names. But somehow we're fascinated by violence. And I'm very upset about my own country because I think that we think we're so good and, and so peace-loving and bringing freedom when we're really a very violent people. And we have a lot of violence in our families. But what my book being translated in all these languages tells me, and 48 Russian PhDs have done this workshop, Japanese have done it, the Iraqian PhD, they all want me to bring it to their country. And I just decided after I did England and Ireland and Scandinavia and Australia, I was, somebody else can do it. I love Canada. I graduated from the University of Toronto. My great education came from here. Studied to be a Catholic priest at St. Basil Seminary in Toronto, 95 St. Joseph Street. And, I have great, I got probably the best education you could have ever had at the University of Toronto. Okay. So I love Canada, and I've done every major Canadian city. Okay,
thank you. I would like to bring you a series of questions on subjects.
Okay.
What do you think of love?
Of love?
Yeah.
Well, I think that we have to be careful not to confuse it with in love. That in love, Helen Fisher has recently written a book called The Anatomy of Love. It's pretty controversial. She's an anthropologist, and she's attempted to show that we have three basic biological programs. One is lust, one is attraction, and one is attachment. And that these are biologically based, and that the initial attraction usually is lust, symmetry, whatever your conception of beauty is, and that first in love has a chemical brain bath that goes with it. Even the word infatuate means shallow love and foolish love. So, but it's a great thing that we fall in love. But if you've got a lot of woundedness, what a lot of people find in this workshop is that they're love addicts, that there's such a thing as love addiction, and now all over we have Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, because there's a tremendous addiction in falling in love. So attachment is what love is, the foundation of love, secure attachment. And that is an attunement, an empathic mutuality between a mothering source and a child. And we now know that it doesn't even have to be your biological mother. It just needs to be the same mothering source. And so once that's established good enough, then a child knows I'm lovable. And if I feel lovable, then I can give love. Now also, if we saw modeled what I call the work of love, that love is work, that you can't just take it for granted. I've got to care about listening to you and disclosing love to you, continuing to disclose that I love you. And sometimes couples get married and they just think you don't have to do this anymore. So love is an extension of the self. It's work. It's caring as much about your security as I care about my own, and being willing. I like the old-fashioned, for better or for worse, unless it's abusive. In other words, I do not encourage someone to stay in a relationship where they're getting battered or abused or whatever, but that you're committed, you're willing to go to any length to make this work out, and you'll go get help if you need to. And then I think a virtue comes out of that, and the old sense of virtue, which is like a second nature. And it's something you don't think about anymore. Truly loving people, they talk about the saints as beyond the law, beyond good and evil. Because why? They're lovers. You do out of love what you would have done out of duty if you didn't have love. Okay. So love is a virtue. It's the highest of the virtues, but it's something that has to be worked at. It doesn't just happen because we got married.
It has to be learned.
It has to be learned.
You're not born with it.
You're not born with it.
All right.
I think there is what the Greeks call sorge between parents and children. There's sort of a natural, but parents can treat children so bad early on that there's no love.
And I guess many people confuse love and sexuality, right?
Absolutely, because it's very clear now with the work we're doing, and I'm a fellow at the Meadows. I've been working with Dr. Patrick Carnes, who's done a lot of the research on sexual compulsivity, that sex addicts or people who are sexually compulsive really don't know anything about love. I mean, if you take cybersex or you take pornography, it's somebody having a relationship with an image or an objectified. It's not a woman or a man, it's an objectification. It's a pair of breasts or a buttocks or a penis, but it's not a human being that you're having a relationship with. So I think there's a very big difference in that true love will engender a deeper kind of sexuality than a person could ever imagine. At least that's been true in my own life.
Okay. What do you think of what we talk about so much these days, pedophiles?
Pedophiles. Well, it's a phenomena that needs to be studied. Now, I was in a Catholic seminary. I was violated by a Catholic priest in high school. I was violated in the seminary, and there was a lot of it there. What we have to be careful of is not making pedophiles, not confusing pedophiles with gay or lesbian.
Right.
In other words, that is not the same thing.
No.
It's a different kind of phenomena. It's one that needs a lot more study. And I think with all the trouble that the Catholic Church has had with it, but I'll tell you, it isn't just the Catholic Church, because I have worked with the Lutheran clergy, I've worked with Methodist clergy, I've worked with Episcopal clergy, I've worked with, honestly, the number one problem that the bishops have asked me to deal with when I work with clergy is acting out.
Yeah, but it's not just in church. I mean, people travel, there's sex tourism, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Basically, for pedophiliac reasons. So how do you have an intuition about the reason for this phenomena?
Well, here's what I know is that people often who have had that done to them will act it out, because the amygdala, the part of the right brain, it's like an imprint, and it imprints that, and that will bypass reason. In other words, if I was violated by a grown man in a certain circumstance, and I see a boy, but I've never done anything about that memory, I see a boy and it's the same circumstance, I may have an energy to act out on that child. So that's one way that it happens. It's a distorted notion of sexuality because it's about power and it's about control. I mean, it's the same thing as the serial rapist or the serial killer who I'm completely all-powerful and I'm in control, and here's this innocent child who is trusting the adult. That's what's so terrible about it. So I think it's about power. It's about people who have shame and who don't feel like they have power or control in their lives. And of course, when you get something like a celibate Catholic clergy, it's going to attract that kind of person. I think the church is attempting to do something about it, and it's about time they did.
You did mention power and control, and that leads me to the next question about money.
Money. Well, money is a really interesting phenomena. I notice that in my own life, like when I was very, at the height of my popularity with the PBS series, I was making a great deal of money. And I remember them interviewing my son, and he was saying that, well, my mom and dad are just so into money. Well, what it was with both of us, because I had no idea of what was going to happen to me. When I did the first PBS series, I had no idea that was going to, in fact, they said this won't go. You can't be a talking head for an hour on PBS. And of course it went all over the country, and it went into Canada, and it just was at the right time, at the right place. My money was always about the catastrophe of growing up poor, and the catastrophe of being poor again. So the drive to make money for me was always about scarcity. And my mother was literally addicted to scarcity. You can get addicted to scarcity. Even in her old age, when she had enough money where she could have taken a trip or something, she wouldn't spend a dime because of scarcity. And I actually had to work through that where I could start enjoying the fruits of my labor and spend money to buy pretty things and antiques, and because it was all, saving for a rainy day because of catastrophes coming. Now that's one way. The other thing is I think money is power. I mean, we honor power, Barb's 500, and I vow I'm not going to look at that, and I look at it every time to see who the richest person is, and we somehow we think that makes somebody something because they have a bunch of money.
But what about, everybody, people on the street who are struggling? Is there, in your experience, is there any specific twist of mind that aside from addiction to scarcity, that prevents people from being able to have just normal abundance in their life?
Well, one of the things about toxic shame is that it will tend to produce, the way I say it is healthy shame. If you have a healthy sense of shame, what does that mean? It means humility. It means limit. You know your limits. You know that as a human you're going to make mistakes, you need help, you're not God, okay, and that you need to learn and be open to learning. Okay, well, if you don't have that, then you try to be more than human, so the perfectionistic, or you be less than human. So what we know is you've got hoarders and people who are, like we had a woman in treatment in the Meadows, and we asked her, how are you going to be, a homeless woman, we asked her, how are you going to pay for this? She says, I have a bank account with $975,000 in it. She had actually was doing tricks on the street, but she hoarded every dime she made.
Really?
So here she was coming into treatment. They were prepared to take her, and it turns out she's got almost $1 million. So that's addiction to scarcity. Or the other side is the spendthrift, is the people who spend every dime they get. And then, of course, the credit card people, I've had girlfriends along the way where I've looked and I've said, do you realize that, like one gal that I went with for about 3 years after my divorce was making $90,000 a year. She was a couture manager of a very fancy department store. But she had bills on credit cards paying 19 and 23%. And I showed her one day, you don't have a cent after 48 years of your life. You do not have a cent. Everything you have saved, you owe. And you don't realize that you're, and if people could understand that they've got to live within their means.
How is it, why is it they don't understand it?
I think the whole culture promises, get these plastic cards. I get them, you know how many you get in the mail? They're rolling in. So what do they want? Well, they want the 19% interest. And they know that with 19 or 20% interest, they can have a lot of people that they don't collect from and still make a ton of money. So the whole culture is geared to telling you that you can have plenty almost magically. And see, money requires virtue also. It's the book that I'm trying to get finished is a book on moral intelligence, but it's a book about virtue. And that somehow I've got to enjoy the money, of course, but there's a point where, like I like to gamble, but there's a point where I would never, ever spend more than, if I lose it all, in fact, I'm going to go to the casino tonight. And if I lose it all, it won't matter. I'm going to play. I have a good time doing it. It's fun for me. It's adult play. But I have seen people where their whole identity is bound up with it. And then you see people who have lost all their money and think they're going to make it on the lottery. The other piece is hard work. I've been working since I'm 71. I've been working since I was 8 years old. Now, I can moan and cry about that, but on the other hand, that really taught me about responsibility and commitment. And you know, I will come, and if we've had 1,200 people in this workshop, we've had 50 in it, I work just as hard. I'm going to do my best.
Yeah. You just mentioned your age, and one question I wanted to ask you was, what's your perspective on this world, having seen so much in 71 years, you said? I mean, you saw the war, you saw the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and I mean, you saw this whole world change, literally, and you were part of that change. So what's your perspective on what we've been doing in the last 50 years and what we're headed for?
Well, the 20th century was an amazing century, and you know, 1905 Einstein discovered the theory of relativity, and 40 years later we incinerated 2 cities. The Wright brothers flew a couple of 100 yards, and 66 years later we walked on the moon. I grew up with black and white water fountains, with the ice boxes where the Iceman came, with no television, where nobody had ridden on an airplane. I see that what happened at the end of the Second World War was what I call the beginning of deep democracy, that we got it, that patriarchy had inherent in it, there was inherent in patriarchy, the possibility of Hitler, Stalin, and even, as much as I hate to say it, the churches that have this authoritarian rule, where you know, you have somebody with all the power, who like an infallible pope, for example. I can't, in my logical mind, accept such a position. Cardinal Newman, who was one of the greatest theologians in the Catholic Church, he railed against that. And that, you know, you don't do this and set something up like this. So that kind of patriarchy, I don't care how good the person is, a lot of the time, you always run the risk of a Hitler. And you run the risk, see, Hitler could have happened in Canada, he could have happened in the United States, he could have happened in any country where feelings were being repressed, where there was corporal punishment. And I would say the Canadians and some of the other cultures have done a lot better than the U.S. in stopping, you know, capital punishment and some things like that. But we grew up with that. So we started seeing the civil rights and civil disobedience. Now that was a direct, it came from Gandhi, but it came from Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau refused to pay his poll tax. Gandhi read Thoreau, Martin Luther King read Thoreau, and so they began to what? Go against obediential authority. And at the Nuremberg trials, in the new book that I hope comes out sometime, I have this, Sir, I forget who it is, but it's the English judge who is talking to Eichmann about that there is a law that's higher than the law of obedience to civil authority, and that's the law of conscience. I also have in my book Hugh Thompson, who was a helicopter pilot at My Lai, who landed and tried to stop them from killing all these innocent people. There's an example, and Cali ordered him out of there, and he would not leave. And he and Andretti, who was the other co-pilot, they drew their guns and they said, we will shoot you back if you shoot one of these people. And he saw a boy moving in a ditch and he picked him up, and 20 years later he went to dedicated school and this kid walks up to him. Hodai, this kid that he found in the ditch. Now that takes great strength to have a conscience. And I think we began to see conscience, even though there's still a long way to go, but we had the rights of women, women's rights. I mean, I can't believe that, you know, women weren't allowed to vote universally till my mother's birth, 1917 or whatever it was. So we have seen, then we've seen gay rights, lesbian rights. We've seen the the men's movement, and men who felt lost after the Second World War began to, you know, like at this inner child workshop, we have as many men as women, always. In the beginning we didn't, But men are now getting into their emotions. And then we have the discovery of the child. And what we didn't understand in the patriarchal system is that a lot of what we thought was normal is actually abuse. Now, that doesn't mean our parents were bad or that they tried to abuse us. We're not blaming them. We're saying you can't make an automobile out of a horse and buggy, and that we've got to change the way we parent. Children, Montessori discovered, Steiner discovered, children are naturally moral and they have absorbent minds. And one of the things that supports this workshop is what Ashley Montague called neotomy, which is the whole theory that we have evolved by retardation. Now that really is hard to understand, but what it means is that if you look at the skull of the Neanderthal infant and the skull of the mature adult, our adults, those skulls look very much the same. What happened to the apes and the early people is that in their evolution, they evolved too fast. And so you see these elongated brains where we now have a long childhood, takes us a long time, the brain doesn't fully mature till we're 25. So what does that mean? It means we are to maximize childhood traits. That's why this workshop is so valuable.
Right.
We heal the wounded child so we can get to what? What are the childhood traits? Spontaneity, resiliency, open-mindedness, faith, trust, creativity, joy, love, friendship. God, we don't want to minimize those traits. We want to maximize them.
Right. You were talking about consciousness, and we've talked about religion, and I would like to know how do you define spirituality?
Well, I think of it as an inner system. You know, religion is a belief system held by a body of people and followed by that body of people, whereas a spirituality is more an internal meaning system. I might follow the laws of my church, but I've also got to internalize them so that as I walk the walk that I talk, that I am what I'm talking about. And a spirituality is the highest virtues. It's, you know, it would be virtue, it would be love, it would be justice, it would be what our nature has a potential for. And I think we're spiritual from the very beginning. We're not animals who need to become spiritual. We're spiritual beings who become more spiritual as we grow up or we get dehumanized. And one of the things, let me just finish that idea of living 70 years. We are the last generation of an old age and the first generation of a new age, because what I didn't talk about was the information revolution. And now for the first time, work and marriage and all of that, we've got equality in a way we've never had it before. We have the possibility of deep democracy. I mean, one day we can all go to our internets and go and vote for the person we want, and everybody, it'll be an absolute representational democracy, and guys like Ralph Nader can run, you know, fully and not have to be, you know, this beautiful man who has to be, you know, just traipsing behind these two guys that a lot of us say, thank God we only have to choose one of them. And I you know, I don't want to overdo this, but I've said that on several of our, you know, because we only have this two-party system.
Isn't it the same? We have the same here in Canada and Quebec too.
Yeah.
And you end up, you know, wondering, choosing this, you know, same old, same old.
Yeah. Yeah, and wouldn't it be great if we had the opportunity to really, you know, and I think we will. I mean, in other words, where are we going in the future? Yes, there's some terrible things going on, but there always has been. They're always in change. It's like trapeze, that when I let go of the bar to go to grab the next bar, I'm in anomie. And I think that periods of chaos like we're in now, see, because what happened at the end of the 20th century is that we lost respect for obedience to authority, because what? The government, the policemen, police brutality, the priests, the ministers, we quit trusting authority. And so the idea of developing conscience and virtue means that it's not outside in a body of laws, it's inside in a body of laws. And the new person of the future has to be much more resilient, has to be much more, I mean, even in work, right. Even in work, it's not, companies now, many of your employees are much more technically skilled than the owner of the work, and you don't have factories full of merchandise. You have very quick, you want speed, you want resilience, you want all those neotomous qualities, all those childlike qualities to survive in the new world. Now, obviously, we have to deal with terrorism, and I don't know, I keep thinking that maybe there'll be a time when there's really peace on earth. I doubt it. I mean, there's something in the human nature that we want to make what we are the best and make the other not okay. Religion is dangerous if it doesn't have spirituality. You asked me that a minute ago.
Right.
That if religion doesn't have spirituality, it becomes religiosity. If religion doesn't own its shadow, its own dark side, then it becomes extremely dangerous. And religiosity has been the source of some of the greatest tragedy the world has ever known.
You're right. We have so many questions for
I know,
you, and you are so interesting.
Well, it's exciting for me too, because it's been my whole life, the last 40 years of my life have been this.
Okay, so a few questions quickly.
Okay.
What is your view on success, achieving success in general, for general people?
Well, growing up absolutely dirt poor, I can remember standing on the corner going to church saying, my children will never suffer like this again. I will make money, I will. And so money became really an obsession with me for a while. And then having made it and made a lot more than I ever imagined I could, primarily because of people supporting and buying the books and all of that, then, I did what a lot of people do when they get some money. I bought a Mercedes and I bought antiques. And then you get to a place when you totally realize that success is about relationships, that happy is harder than money, that in the evening of life, John of the Cross says, will be judged on love alone. What will it matter that I have an antique malachite Russian table when I'm laying on my deathbed? My kids are just going to fight over that. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I've got all this stuff, but it isn't what makes me happy. So success is being able to have friendships, and you probably can't have very many friendships, deep friendships, because it requires work. The love of friendship, Aristotle thought that was the highest love, because a friendship is a pure choice. The love of friendship, the spousal love, somebody that loves you and they love you and you love them, they are your attachment figure. Like I love my wife and, just can't imagine.
But why is it that, many people have a very specific idea of how to succeed in life, and I don't see many of them succeeding as well as you have. And so what is it with you that what made your success? What was the basis of that success?
Well, it's hard to know. I think you could say some of it is almost fate. You're at the right place at the right time with the right skills, the right information. Like when I did Bradshaw and the Family, that just went wild in the United States. It was like the consciousness, that whole consciousness that I was talking about that ended with the Second World War. People were really beginning to get, and as I stood up there and talked about dysfunctional families, incest, battered families, emotionally abusing people, I've had thousands of people tell me they were laying there watching that and with a gun, they were thinking of killing themselves, and suddenly it made sense to them. So I think that we've got to be careful that it's sort of like the true self or the soul in us you get what you want, but often not the way you thought you wanted it.
Okay.
Not the way you thought you were going to get it. But what I've always had is, I'm a student. I read 40 new books to write the book I just finished. I'm always reading, and I'm always open to learning. And I think that's an important ingredient of success. If you start thinking that you've got it made, then I think I think if you think there's only one way, I think you probably just set out and do commit, go in a direction, and make choices and be willing to change. That's the other piece. And let me tell you a way that I say it. There's a poem by David White, and he says, sometimes it takes darkness and the sweet confinement of aloneness to learn that anything or anybody that does not bring me alive is too small for me. So what is it that vitalizes you? What kind of work makes you happy? I start my book with a guy, the fire chief. He died in 9/11, but he was talking about the fireman's culture. That nobody does this kind of work for the money. I mean, you can't be doing this for the money. You're doing it because your appetite is such that you want to help people.
What was your appetite?
Well, my appetite was to make money. I mean, because I was so scared.
But there are thousands of ways of making money. Why did you choose that one?
It wasn't just, I shouldn't say it wasn't just to make money, but I don't want to kid myself and say I'm doing this only because I care about other people, because I've heard people do that, and it's BS, and it's pretty clear that it's BS. I went to 95 St. Joseph Street to St. Basil's Seminary to be a Basilian priest. I was 21 years old, and I was really ready to commit my life and my sexuality to God. Now, when my mother was dying, she said, "You became a priest after all." I mean, I continued to do. Like now, I really don't have to work. I mean, I could bask, but I'd go nuts, I think, because my calling is to be a teacher. And I love it. I mean, you could see me yesterday in the workshop. I'm having a great time. Right. And the more the people are loving it and learning it, the more fun I'm having.
Also, but that's true, but you also needed to be so deeply honest about yourself, right?
Yes. And I learned that when I sobered up, the whole idea of rigorous honesty. In fact, I just did a workshop on that, and it's taken me time to realize that there are levels of that. Mm-hmm. Carl Jung has been one of my great teachers, and Jung talks about the shadow, which is very much like toxic shame. But it's often a part of you that behaviors that you don't like, that you don't want to, and you put them aside and you repress them, and actually you get to a point where you're not even aware of them. You project them on other people because you don't want to look at it in yourself. Like somebody, why I say that my fear and insecurity was driving me to make money is that I don't want to kid myself that I only did it to help people and save souls and all that. I did it for both things, and I'm still doing it for that. Because, at the height, I was making tremendous amounts of money. I don't make anything like that now, but that's not the point. The point is I'm still being a teacher, and that's my fate, and that's my calling. So I don't know how to say how I got where I am, except that I was determined, I was focused, I kept learning. Every chance I got, I went to a workshop, and I learned something, and I look back and every piece of that has been important to where I am now.
And it's universal, right?
Absolutely. And if people could get it, James Hillman wrote a great book called The Soul's Code. Hillman has criticized me, but I still think he's a brilliant guy in a lot of ways, but he's very much an intellectual. He's a genius intellectual. And he wrote a book called The Soul's Code, and it's sort of about your calling and your destiny and how, if you look at biographies, and it's really something that touches on therapy, that our therapies are never adequate. I think you were suggesting that at the break. You were going to ask me about the future of psychotherapy. Well, our therapies, you cannot encapsulate a person with a therapy because a therapy is a theory. And people go beyond their therapies. I mean, you probably couldn't have predicted seeing me at 30 when I left St. Basil Seminary because I had an alcoholic problem, and they were seeing that, you know, and of course there was another level. I didn't want to be a celibate priest, but I didn't know how to get out of there. I was too insecure. Still, that rupture, if you will, was a turning point in my life. And I wound up committing myself to a state hospital. Now, if you could have seen John Bradshaw, December the 11th, 1965, on a stretcher, being hauled into R&I Ward 8 for the criminally insane, because at that time they didn't have any place for alcoholics, and then you saw him on PBS or being, you know, the night I'm nominated for an Emmy, or the book's 2 years #1 on the New York Times. How do you figure?
Dark night of the soul?
Dark night of the soul. I mean, but why didn't it happen to everybody? See, I don't know. Now, you know, a spiritual person might say there's a thing called grace and destiny, and maybe a higher power has something to do with that. Mm-hmm. I certainly believe that. Whether anyone else does or not, I believe that I've been graced and I've been blessed. And I had a pretty profound spiritual experience in 1981. I don't talk about this a lot, but I was running on the highways in Minnesota, and I had a beach house there, and I was running. I'd run 11 miles that day, so I was probably in an endorphin high. You know, and you can do anything you want with this. I don't care what anybody does with it. For me, it was a spiritual experience. So I'm running along, and I see the kind of the traditional face of Christ out on the horizon. And there's no reason for this. I mean, I haven't been reading the Bible, and in fact, I'm in a period, the end of an acting out period of sexual addiction. And we probably ought to say something about that in a minute. But I hear, what I get is, I don't hear a voice out of the heavens, but what I get is, do the job you were intended to do. It's sort of like that's what came across to me. And I remember running back to the cabin and going, boy, the voice didn't say anything about sex. Thank God. You know, it's like, because I was in trouble, you know, with this sexual acting out. But within 6 months, I had started the first sex and love addiction program in Houston. And a year and a half later, I did Bradshaw and the Family on PBS. And I went to KBDI in Denver, and we had 5,000 people in the audience. And I walked up and I said, everybody take a deep breath and close your eyes. And I looked in the back of the room and I saw this figure. Really? And I've seen it 19 times since it's happened. Now, you know, somebody could easily be saying, you're making it up, Bradshaw, and I hardly have ever talked about this because journalists can rip this stuff up so bad. I'm not claiming anything. All I know is that for me, it set my life on a course. And it confirmed it every time you saw it, right? Every time I've seen it, it's been a confirm. Like Steven Spielberg wanted to do, when he saw The Inner Child on Oprah, he just was taken with it. Because Spielberg was a young Jewish boy in Scottsdale. He got beat up going to school. He was beat up many times. And that's when he'd go up in the hills and he would make movies. And then his father would criticize him for that, you know, how are you going to get ahead doing that? So when Spielberg saw this Oprah that I did, and Oprah came apart on the show, to the point that later I did work with Oprah and Quincy Jones and a whole group of her friends, including Streisand and a whole bunch of them, who saw this and had this wounded child in them. See, a lot of people who need narcissistic admiration have this wounded child. It's like every time, I saw the face telling me not to do the Spielberg thing, that it was not the right time for me to do that. And it really wasn't, because I was going all over the US and Canada and Australia doing these inner child workshops, and people were coming out. I mean, Toronto, the first one, we had 10,000 people there. So it touched something in people's lives that needed to be touched. And I don't think that I'm anything special for doing that. But I thank my higher power for that. I was at the right place at the right time. And that was my priestly vocation. But in a way, I would have never dreamed of it. I would never dreamed of being #1 on the New York Times. I mean, that never was part of my plan. I don't know whether that makes any sense, but that...
But you follow your calling.
You follow your calling.
You were graced.
You follow your calling.
Right. You did touch upon sex addiction?
Yeah. I think you had mentioned, what was a kind of a turning point or something in your life that was... I had been sober about 10 years from alcohol, and then very slowly, I mean, I had been married 5 years, but very slowly, I found that I was being hit on a lot. As a public person, I was a young guy, and I never believed I was attractive, but evidently some women did, and I would be... I had women come walk up to me in my Sunday school class and say, put their hands in my face and say, I'll do anything for you. And so being a public figure, now I wasn't on TV yet, it wasn't any of that, but it was more locally in Houston. I realized, because I had been a pimple-faced, acne-faced adolescent, and I'd never had a decent relationship with a woman. But I'd been, I had this troubled early childhood where I was in brothels at 13 years old, and I mean, that's severe abuse we call it the Summer of 42 syndrome. So, and then being molested by a priest, having no father, having a mother that was incested who had sexualized rage, saying that men are crud. All of that went into my beginning to act out sexually. I began to have affairs. And it's like, from 1975, when my father died, and there was something about my father's death that triggered this, that from 75 to 81, I progressively acted out more sexually, and came to realize by about 79, I was starting to realize this is just like my other addiction. And that's when I even reconceptualized the whole addiction model, as the problem is not an addiction usually, it's addictiveness. And that's why this inner child work is so important, that you've got to heal the hole in your soul. You've got to heal the sadness that's unresolved down there, because it's like a black hole, and it's sucking all your energy. Now, I also had the predisposition toward addiction, the missing strands of D2, D4, D6, dopamine, DNA. I had that genetically, so I had a kind of a genetic predisposition. But I also had a family that was just, repressed sexually, and there was a lot of incest on my mother's side, which was never spoken about. So there was a lot of factors that went into it. But it was when I had this experience of running on the highway, I was in, and I had just gone crazy to the point, but I had rituals, like I never came home past 9:30. But at a certain point, I might be in a relationship with 3 women, the same week, and it was just out of control. And all I seemed to have to do was to say, I'm attracted to you, and boom. So it was just, it was like, and of course I'd been a celibate priest, and I'd been truthfully celibate, as I say. I hope God remembers that. But once that happened, that experience happened, and I'd had some guys in AA who were saying that they thought they were sex addicts. Because at the time, remember, Pat Carnes wrote The Sexual Addiction in 1979. I mean, nobody was talking about. We knew things like nymphomania, but nobody was really talking about this as a serious problem. And it's still being debated as a serious problem. There are plenty of people who don't think there's any such thing. I guarantee you, I've seen people lose their whole family on phone sex, spend $150,000 a year on massage parlors. Cyber sex has just gone rampant in our culture. So it's a huge problem. I mean, we treat it at the Meadows in Wickenburg, Arizona, just all the time. Anyway, I stopped, and I've been absolutely clean and sober ever since. And I mean, it was the greatest thing, because I could have never done what I did. I couldn't have come into these big cities and done these workshops, because women are, you know, anybody, if it's a woman doing it, you're gonna project on the speaker. He seems to know it all. Here's this guy talking about intimacy, but she doesn't know how I am at home, you know. And that's why I try to tell the truth about that.
Right.
You know, and tell people I raged in my marriage, and, you know, because it helps people to come out of hiding.
What about the gay brain?
The what?
The gay brain.
The gay brain. Well, early on, as a therapist, I had people come to me, and of course, I grew up in the South, Houston, Texas, where, as a child and as an adolescent, you know, we called it rolling queers. You know, if you saw somebody in a bar who was gay, we might take that person out and rob them. Now, we were a sick bunch of adolescents. But there was this whole, you know, and of course I was in the Catholic Church, and there was this rigidity about this is against nature, and yet you look at nature, there are birds that are gay, there are all kind of animals that are gay. We've had gay people from the beginning. If gayness were a choice, who in the world would take it? Right. When you're going to be condemned to hell by all the churches, and you're going to be ridiculed or risk your life. I mean, to me, it's the most ridiculous question I've ever heard anybody asking, is gay and lesbian a choice? It's not a choice. I remember walking into my best friend's house. He had 8 children, 5 boys. I knew the one that was gay immediately. And there are now at least 6 studies that have come out on the gay brain, where they're showing that the gay man's brain is identical to the female brain in certain structures. And I don't know why we don't have more studies on this. Now, some of the gays have reacted to that themselves, because they think you're going to get these crazy conservatives coming in and cutting out our brains. Or they'll do, you know, MRIs to little babies. And it's that somehow, and maybe I'll write this book, that the part of gays and lesbians in God's plan. Right. I want to write that book, because they are part of the divine plan. Right. And then someday we're going to have bishops and popes and everybody in the world hanging their head in shame for the abuse of gay and lesbian people. So I can get on a high horse on this one. But they have been severely abused.
Yeah, they have. I would like you to tell us a few words about how you see the future of psychology, and maybe a little word on Jung and Hillman and Carl Rogers.
Well, the future of psychology, I think this whole non-dominant hemisphere, the whole phenomena of emotional intelligence, that we're now beginning to understand that when you're in the non-dominant side of the brain, there is still a frontal lobe there that has intelligence. The way I like to help people with that is like describing poetry as felt thought. T.S. Eliot said, "Who will parse the broken measure of the wasteland, my world-weary masterpiece in which the very metric tells the tale?" That is, it's the sound that communicates the meaning. There's nothing more powerful than music to move you to action. So there's an intelligibility. See, Aristotle understood this. Thomas Aquinas understood this. In my book, I've gone back to them because they had a notion of moral intelligence, but it was much more in the non-dominant than the dominant. And that's why hellfire and damnation doesn't work to teach anybody virtue. I mean, it works, it scares the hell out of people, but it doesn't really cause an internalizing where I do good because good is good to do. I'm not bribed by heaven or threatened by hell. I think the future of psychology is going to be more right brain to right brain. What Carl Rogers, you mentioned him, like listening and valuing and being there for you. Martin Buber, great Jewish theologian, was once asked, what is it that heals in any therapy? And he said, it's the I and the thou. And this is what Alan Shore at UCLA is saying now, that especially where we have attachment trauma, where we have attachment dysfunction, and that's what my workshop's about. It's helping people to understand that you didn't get your developmental dependency needs met, so that you have an attachment disorder. In this workshop I do on post-romantic stress disorder, where once the chemical bath of in love wears off, then whatever your attachment skills, that's all you got left. And for some of us, we don't have any. So it becomes, I think we're going to see that there's a place for cognitive therapy. There's a place for what Hillman and Deepak and Wayne Dwyer, those people do. But we're also going to see more emphasis on this feeling work, the original pain work.
Right.
Now, Carolyn Mace and certain people and Deepak and Hillman have criticized this, and there's a valuable criticism that you can make your victimization into an identity. In other words, the only identity I have is saying, I'm John Bradshaw, I'm a sex addict, I'm a recovering sex addict, codependent, and I don't focus on my strengths as a teacher or a poet or a writer or whatever. So they have made a valid critique that some people get addicted to their victimization. We don't in any way suggest that in this workshop. We are saying that you're doing this so you can move on and not repeat the past. And secondly, you're doing this because until you have truly separated from your source figures, and you know there's no human security, you cannot enter the realm of spirituality.
Right.
Because until I know there's no human security, I haven't hit the dark night of the soul. If I still think there's a mom and dad and we're going to live happily ever after, then I haven't confronted death and dying. And I haven't confronted my need to be part of community and attach and all those things that I think are part of spirituality. Mm-hmm. So I see Hillman's critique. Hillman's a very brilliant intellectual, and I know that in the men's movement, a lot of men got turned off because they said he shamed them, and anytime they talked about their hurt and their pain. See, there's a value in validating a person's hurt and pain, especially when it's in the non-dominant hemisphere, because you don't know it. I give the example of myself being very successful early on there in Philadelphia, and I'd just broken up with this woman I was talking about, and I was in a lot of pain over that. But I got a standing ovation. I went to my room. The maid asked me to sign her book. And I sat down and I was feeling suicidal. And it's like my right brain knows how successful I am, and my left brain knows how successful I am, but my right brain still has some of this sadness and pain that I mean, it's like you don't just finish it. I don't want people to get that. 3-day workshop isn't going to take it all away, but it's going to turn you in a direction that you can finish it and that you can know where to go.
Yeah, and I would think that many people go through years of therapy without, a breaking point or, being born again from it. And generally, I would think that your work adds an element that is essential to go 4-quadrant, to quote Wilbur, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's sort of like, I see 4 stages. One is you just got to do something. Nothing changes till something changes. So one day you go to your girlfriend and you say, I'm in this terrible relationship and I can't get out of it. And she says, well, there's a group of women who have, battering husbands or abusive husbands or whatever. And you can objectify your situation by being in the group. Or you go to a 12-step group. Or you go to a therapist. Okay, now my 12-step sponsor could not have taken me into this original pain work. So there was a part where I could have never known, I could never get beyond my addictiveness. It was that sexual addiction that helped me to get that I have to do deeper work.
Right.
And when I had a hospital unit for 9 years, and this is all we did, is original pain work. We had brilliant success. We had Stanford psychology department studying our work until managed care ran us out. I mean, we just couldn't do it anymore because we couldn't put anybody in there unless they were suicidal.
Yeah, but finding that validates I would, from personal experience, it validates you for not succeeding at being healthy so far.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, until you've touched that.
That it ain't over till it's over.
Right.
And that what happens is if you haven't done this second level work, you get addicted to AA or you get addicted to 12-step.
Exactly.
I know people that run around and say it's divinely inspired and it's like a cult. And when I go to meetings, I say, because there are people in AA that'll say, you can't talk about sexual addiction in here. And I say, I'm going to tell you, I'm 40 years sober, and if I hadn't dealt with my sexual addiction and gotten to the deeper stuff, I'd have never been sober right now. Right. Okay, the third level, though, is cognitive work. This is where Aaron Beck and some of these, the people that talk about values and beliefs. Right. And then the fourth level is the Course in Miracles, or Deepak, or Wayne Dyer. Those guys are brilliant. But sometimes I think people try to jump up here before they've gone through here, and what happens, they get addicted to that. You can get addicted to Deepak. You can get addicted to Wayne. Now you can get addicted to Bradshaw too. And I know people that have gotten addicted to the feeling work, and all they do, if it isn't feeling work, they say it's no good. Well, I say no, there's a place you move beyond that, and then you have to build your skills back again.
Mm-hmm. Okay. During the break, you quoted something about spirituality and individuality.
Spirituality and individuality. Well, until I've left home, and in a way what this workshop is grief work. It's helping you to separate internally, because for the child, parents are your first higher power. Masterson, the guy that did all the work on the borderline personality, he talks about the illusion of omnipotence. And that at about 3.5, as a child, if they healthily resolve shame, where they get polarity and not polarization. Mm-hmm. Mom's good mom, bad mom. Good dad, bad man. I'm good and bad. I'm both and, not either or. That when you've done that, you begin to break down the illusion of omnipotence. But for those of us that didn't get past that stage, we either keep our parents as saints or we make monsters out of them. But either way, you've polarized them. Now, what this grief work does is it allows you to separate. You separate. And as you separate, you really have left home. In the workshop, by Sunday morning, we have an exercise where you've left home. You've taken the child with you, and that's the visualization. And you turn the corner and you see someone you love, or you see your higher power in whatever way that represents. And you tell the child, we're going to be okay, but we have to leave home. That is, we have to have a life. And what I tell people is that once you know that your parents can't save you from death, then you have entered the realm of spirituality. Because now you've got to, if you choose a higher power, it's because you chose it. You've chosen it out of your darkness, out of your, knowing there's no human security. But so many people just make their higher power, they make God their parents. They parentalize the deity.
They're your first gods.
They're your first gods. But a lot of people go find a pastor that's just like their parents. Or they find a church that's just like their parents, that tells them everything to do. Yeah. See, I like to stand up and say, I'm going to face my destiny without magical beliefs. I choose to believe, and I choose to be a Christian, but I don't think it's the only thing. It's the way that I have been given, the symbols that I have been given. It was the tradition that I have come up in that I believe, but I choose to believe it. It's a risk, it's a leap.
So your belief is an actual choice, not something you're like
it's an actual choice. I say it over and over again. Nobody knows, underline anything about God. Right. And I am so incensed when I hear people saying, God told me, or God wants you, and God knows, as if they knew. It's this great mystery. And this is the part that takes courage. And faith takes courage. It's a leap, Kierkegaard said. It's like lying on 70,000 fathoms of water and being joyful, he said. And for a lot of people, it's not that at all. It's not a risk at all. It's the safest thing they do in their life.
So what you're saying basically is, until you have left home and become your own individual person, you cannot access a true spirituality, right? Absolutely.
That's perfectly said.
That's it.
That it's my spirituality now. It's not my mom and dad's.
All right. There's been a funny phenomenon called teddy bear bags that happen. How do you see this?
The teddy bears and the...
Yeah.
Yeah, it's when we did Homecoming on PBS at KQED in San Francisco, we had a guy on there. He'd actually been a bandito. And he had a little stuffed frog. And he was talking to the frog as the frog's father. You know, that the frog represented him. And we got the press just beating us up about that. And what the phenomena of that is that in the non-dominant hemisphere, all the communication with the mothering source, the attachment is coming through sound. Carl Stern, the great psychiatrist who was here in Montreal, who wrote The Flight from Woman, he talks about that all of that bonding comes through touch, the sound of her voice, stories, bodily feelings, so that the teddy bear is a metaphor and a symbol that the child, as they slowly leave their attachment bonding, they grab hold to the teddy bear. And the teddy bear becomes the attachment figure. And then slowly, they leave the teddy bear. So a lot of the people who are doing this work who have been severely abused bring the teddy bears. Now, they're not doing it as much as they did in the beginning, because the press gets on this. They're all left-brained and they ridicule it. And I tell them, come do the workshop. If you want to make fun of it, come do it and see what you get out of it. And don't evaluate it till you've done it. And I say that to a lot of psychology professors who call this stuff junk food and things like that, where they've never even done it, so they don't even know what we're experiencing. And I want people to know we're going to have therapists there. You can't do this work unless you're safe. And we will keep people safe. And I've never had one person of 300,000 who has even remotely suggested that we have damaged them in any way, shape, or form. It's just not true.
Okay, so I have one last question.
Okay.
What is it in your whole life accomplishment that you are most proud of?
Well, I got on a plane going to Sacramento to do a workshop, and I picked up Common Boundary magazine, and I opened it up, and it said the 100 most important writers of the 20th century. And I didn't even know this. I just started flipping through, and there I was. I was one of them. And they said in the beginning of the article that they had polled all their readers, and they had polled the heads of 55 major universities to find who were the most important, who did they consider were the most important people who had affected people's lives in the 20th century. And I was chosen as one of the 100 most important. And the way they said that is that Scott Peck and John Bradshaw did not present a new theory of therapy, but they made it so that people could grasp it. And I'm okay with that. I mean, I'm a teacher, and that's what I've always set out to do. I know I'm not being original. I'm original in the way I put it together, in the way I synthesize it, but the job of a teacher is to communicate other people's work so that people can understand it. And therapy is especially an area where for a long time there was, if I said you have cathected libidinal energy and you're in an involutional melancholia, nobody can understand that. And there is a way that any intelligent person can understand this and then be part of their own recovery. I don't want to take away from the precision of clinical language or good clinical data, but I do know that people can understand it, and that a lot of times, you know, the professionals are hiding behind language and stuff like that. It's very easy to hide behind it, and I don't say all, but there are some who do that. So I am most proud that I was selected, and you know, there are people on there like Frankl and Freud and Jung, and while I know I'm in not anywhere the same category, I probably did in my generation touch more lives. I know I did. Freud, they bought 100 copies of his book when he did the interpretation of dreams and presented the theory of the unconscious. So Scott Peck and I had the ability to touch large crowds and masses of people, whereas those people didn't have that opportunity. So I'm very grateful for that. I mean, I have that framed, and me and my inner child we really like that.
And we thank you so much for bringing that to all of us.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.